It's 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. You're sitting in a conference room that smells faintly of burnt coffee and synthetic carpet cleaner. The fluorescent lights hum with that low, suffocating frequency that makes the space between your eyes ache. Someone across the table, maybe your director, maybe a peer, just said, "I'll get that to you by the end of the day." And you both know it's a lie. You nod. They nod. The meeting ends. Nothing changes. That is the corporate lie. It's not the dramatic, movie villain betrayal. It's the slow, mutually assured destruction of trust that happens in plain sight every single day in offices across the world. It is the quiet erosion of your word, and it is killing your sense of self. The Romans had a concept for this, or rather, they had a concept for its exact opposite. They called it Fides, the divine personification of trust and good faith, paired with Veritas, truth, and Constantia, steadfastness. For the Roman Republic, Fides wasn't just a nice-to-have soft skill. It was the ancient firewall that prevented the entire system from collapsing into tyranny and chaos. When your word is meaningless, your society is meaningless. And right now, your internal society is burning. You're here because you've tried to fix the exhaustion. You've downloaded the meditation apps. You've tried quiet quitting. You've spent thousands on therapy to talk about your childhood, your boundaries, and your imposter syndrome. And you're still waking up with a pit in your stomach. Why? Because those things treat the symptom. They treat the anxiety, the burnout, the Sunday scaries, but they do not treat the soul. The Romans understood that integrity isn't a moral luxury. It is the biological and psychological foundation of all self-respect. Without it, you are just a bundle of reflexes reacting to Slack notifications. This is the story of Marcus Thorne, a supply chain manager from Chicago who had everything the corporate world said would make him happy, and it was destroying him. To understand Marcus Thorne at 33, you have to understand the gray noise of his professional life. It wasn't always a crisis. From the outside, it looked like a triumph. He had the West Loop apartment with the exposed brick, the title of supply chain manager at a mid-tier logistics firm, and the Yeti mug that kept his cold brew at an optimal 38 degrees. But inside his skull, the noise was deafening. The gray noise is that constant, low-grade hum of professional obligation that never quite resolves into a melody. It's the vibration of the iPhone on the nightstand at 6 a.m. before the alarm even goes off. It's the phantom buzz in your thigh during your commute on the L train, making you check a lock screen that hasn't lit up. It's the scent of dry erase markers in a glass-walled room where people use words like synergy and bandwidth to mask the fact that they are asking you to do the work of 3 people. The gray noise was the endless grinding friction of the supply chain itself, the delayed freight, the customs holds, the angry emails from retail partners, but it was also the interpersonal friction of managing it. Every day, Marcus sat at the epicenter of a million tiny broken promises. A vendor promised a shipment would arrive on the 12th. It arrived on the 19th. His VP promised headcount for Q3. It was pushed to Q4. Marcus promised his team they wouldn't have to work the weekend. They were on a 9 p.m. call on Saturday. The entire ecosystem ran on a currency of lies, of omission and necessity, and Marcus was the broker. The breaking point didn't come as a dramatic tragedy. There was no screaming match, no mass layoff, no tearful breakdown in the executive washroom. It was a micro-collapse. It happened on a Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. The quarterly logistic sync. Marcus was standing at the monitor, presenting the Q3 freight costs. He was talking about container dwell times and demurrage fees. As he spoke, he looked out at the table. His director, a man named Patterson, was typing furiously on his laptop, not looking up. 2 junior analysts were splitting their attention between Marcus's slide and their Apple Watches. A woman from finance was highlighting a printed spreadsheet with a neon yellow marker. In that fraction of a second, Marcus realized he was invisible. Not in a nobody appreciates me way, but in a terrifying existential way. The words coming out of his mouth were just sound. He could have said, "We're shipping the containers to the moon," and Patterson would have grunted, "Great, a line on that." He was a conduit for data, a fleshy API endpoint. He had no gravity. He had no presence. Why? Because he had no Fides. He had spent so long making promises he couldn't keep. agreeing to timelines he knew were impossible, and bending the truth to keep the peace, that his word had become entirely weightless. He was a ghost haunting his own career, but the internal lie wouldn't let him see it. The internal lie whispered in his ear as he sat back down in his ergonomic chair, the kind that cost $800 and offered lumbar support but no spinal relief. The internal lie said, "If I just work harder, if I just clear the inbox, if I just survive this quarter, I'll finally feel safe." The internal lie is the corporate world's most potent neurotoxin. It convinces you that the exhaustion is a down payment on future peace. Marcus believed it. He had believed it since he was 22. He believed it right up until the moment he met Evelyn Price. Evelyn Price was an anomaly in the Chicago corporate ecosystem. She was 64, a retired chief strategy officer who had stepped away from the Fortune 500 world 5 years prior. Marcus was paired with her through a company-sponsored leadership mentorship program, a program he had only signed up for because it looked good on his performance review. He expected a standard corporate mentor. He expected bullet points on executive presence, networking strategies, and how to manage up. What he got was a woman who seemed utterly untouchable. When Marcus walked into her Lincoln Park brownstone for their first meeting, she didn't offer him a LinkedIn connection or a framework. She offered him black coffee in a ceramic mug, no Yeti, no corporate logo. Her home was quiet. She sat across from him, entirely present, her gaze sharp and unyielding. She didn't check her watch. She didn't fidget. She simply observed him. Marcus immediately launched into his script. He talked about the supply chain bottlenecks, the lack of resources, the difficult VP, and the market conditions. He talked fast, using corporate jargon like a shield, hoping she would validate his struggle, tell him he was doing a great job under tough circumstances. Evelyn let him speak for 10 minutes. She raised a hand. The silence that followed was terrifying. Marcus felt the gray noise rush into the void, his knee bouncing uncontrollably. "Marcus," she said, her voice low and completely devoid of corporate inflection. "You are exhausted, but you are not exhausted because of the supply chain. You are exhausted because you are a liar." Marcus stiffened. The defensive spike rose in his chest. "I don't lie," he snapped. "I work 60 hours a week trying to keep impossible promises." Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "Exactly. You make impossible promises to others, and you make impossible promises to yourself. You say, 'I'll get it done,' when you know you can't. You say, 'I'll take a break next week,' when you know you won't. You have broken so many promises that your own brain doesn't trust you anymore." She let the words hang in the quiet room. Then she asked the pivot question, the question that cracked the foundation of everything Marcus thought he knew about his life. "Are you building a career, Marcus? Or are you building a cage?" Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but nothing came out. A cage. He looked at his life. The late-night emails, the skip gym sessions, the pushback dinners with friends, the constant low-grade anxiety. He had built a beautiful, exposed brick cage. Look at your own life right now. Pause for a moment and ask yourself the question Marcus couldn't answer. If your job title were stripped away tomorrow, if the Slack channels went dark, if the performance reviews ceased to exist, what remains of your Dignitas? Dignitas was the Roman concept of personal worth, reputation, and standing. It wasn't given by a boss, it was earned by the absolute consistency of your character. If your entire sense of worth is tied to a title and a paycheck, and you break your word to yourself every single day to keep that title, you have no Dignitas. You are just an employee. You are not a citizen of your own life. Evelyn didn't offer Marcus a quick fix. She offered him an operating system that was 2,000 years old. The Romans built an empire on Fides, Evelyn told him as they walked through her quiet, snow-dusted backyard. Trust, Veritas, truth, Constantia, steadfastness. These weren't just virtues for Sunday school. They were structural engineers. When a Roman general promised his legion he would hold the line, he held the line. When a merchant guaranteed a shipment, it arrived. Because if you break the chain, the empire falls. Right now, Marcus, your empire is falling. You are the general running away, and you wonder why your troops won't fight for you. Marcus felt the sting of the metaphor. How do I fix it? I can't just tell my VP no. You start with the one person you lie to the most, Evelyn said. She stopped walking and pointed a finger at his chest. Yourself. Your first task is a physical one. Tomorrow you will wake up at 4 a.m. Marcus groaned. I already wake up at 6. I don't need more time to work. You're not going to work, Evelyn interrupted. You are going to sit in a chair. In the dark. No phone, no laptop, no podcast. Just you sitting in silence for 30 minutes. And you are going to keep that promise to yourself. Every morning. No excuses. It sounded absurd. It sounded like a waste of time, but Marcus was so desperate to escape the cage that he agreed. The next morning, 4 a.m. arrived like a hammer. The alarm blared, and Marcus's hand instinctively reached to smash the snooze button. The internal lie roared. You only got 5 hours of sleep. You need the rest. You can start tomorrow. This is stupid. This is the moment where the system begins. This is the Constantia. To understand why this works, you need to understand the neuropsychology of the modern office. Right now, your brain is trapped in a cortisol loop. When you sit in that conference room, smelling the burnt coffee, watching your director ignore you, and you swallow the corporate lie. When you say, yes, I'll get it done, when you know you can't, your brain registers a threat. Not a physical threat, but a social and psychological one. Your hypothalamus activates the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal gland. Your adrenal glands pump cortisol into your bloodstream. Cortisol is meant to save your life from a predator. It spikes your blood sugar, increases your heart rate, and shuts down your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logic, long-term planning, and impulse control. In the corporate world, we live in this state. It's chronic, low-grade cortisol poisoning. Because you are constantly making promises you can't keep. You are constantly failing. Constantly anticipating failure, and constantly spiking your stress hormones. When you wake up at 4 a.m. and you want to hit snooze, that is the cortisol loop fighting to maintain itself. Your brain wants the familiar path of broken promises. But when you override that impulse, when you swing your legs out of bed, walk into the dark living room, and sit in the chair, you do something profound. You activate the prefrontal cortex. You override the amygdala, the brain's fear center. By keeping this tiny microscopic promise to yourself in the dark, you are injecting Veritas into your bloodstream. You are proving to your own nervous system that your word has weight. You are shifting your neurochemistry from the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, into the parasympathetic nervous system, rest, digest, and executive function. You are building the biological foundation of self-respect. The first week for Marcus was agonizing. He sat in his Chicago apartment, the distant red glow of the Willis Tower blinking through the window, and his brain screamed for dopamine. He wanted to check the overnight emails from the European warehouses. He wanted to scroll through the news. He wanted to do anything but sit with the deafening silence of his own mind. But he kept the promise. He sat. Day 8, a Tuesday, 10:14 a.m. The quarterly supply chain sync. The same room, the same smell of synthetic carpet cleaner. Marcus was standing at the monitor again, but this time something was different. The gray noise wasn't as loud. The prefrontal cortex was online. Patterson, his director, was staring at his laptop. Marcus, Patterson said, his voice clipped. We need the Midwest routing restructured by Friday. I know it's tight, but we have to present to the board on Monday. Friday. Marcus looked at the timeline. It was an impossible task. The old Marcus would have felt the spike of cortisol, the panic, and he would have said, yes, we'll get it done, knowing full well he and his team would be working until midnight on Sunday. And even then, the data would be sloppy. The old Marcus would have broken his promise to his team, to the board, and to himself in one breath. But Marcus had been keeping his promise at 4 a.m. His word had started to gain weight. Fides. He paused. He looked at Patterson. No, Dave, Marcus said, his voice steady, lacking the typical corporate apology. We can't do it by Friday. Not if we want accurate numbers. We can have the Eastern Seaboard routing ready by Friday and the Midwest by Tuesday. The room froze. The junior analysts looked up from their Apple Watches. Patterson stopped typing. The silence was terrifying. Marcus felt the old cortisol spike, the desperate urge to backpedal, to say, "Just kidding, I'll make it happen." But he held the line. Constantia. Patterson stared at him for a long, agonizing second. Then he shrugged. "Fine, Tuesday for the Midwest, but the Eastern Seaboard better be flawless on Friday." "Done," Marcus said. Marcus walked out of that meeting feeling 10 feet tall. He had told the truth. He had kept his word. He had set a boundary, and the world hadn't ended. For the first time in years, he felt a sliver of Dignitas. He felt the rush of dopamine and serotonin that comes from alignment, from congruence between your thoughts, your words, and your actions. The system was working. He had one good day, then two, then three. He was sleeping through the night. The phantom vibrations in his thigh had stopped. He felt like a man who had just reclaimed his soul. But the corporate empire does not reward the virtuous. It rewards the compliant. And a man who suddenly keeps his promises is a man who becomes a threat to the system that runs on lies. The Friday of his partial win arrived with a thunderclap. Marcus had just delivered the Eastern Seaboard routing data, flawless, exactly as promised. He was sitting at his desk, sipping his cold brew, allowing himself a moment of rare, genuine satisfaction. Then, his laptop chimed, an email from HR. It was a company-wide restructuring. The logistics division was being audited. Before he could even process the email, his desk phone rang. It was Patterson. "Marcus, my office, now." Marcus stood up, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs, the cortisol loop roaring back to life with a vengeance. He walked down the glass-walled corridor, feeling the eyes of his team on him. He stepped into Patterson's corner office. The door clicked shut behind him. Patterson didn't look up. He was leaning over his desk, his face pale, a legal pad in front of him filled with frantic scribbles. "Sit down," Patterson said, his voice stripped of its usual corporate veneer. "The board is canning the Midwest expansion. I need you to take the fall on the delay." Marcus blinked. "What?" "You told them Tuesday, Marcus. You gave us an opening," Patterson said, finally looking up, his eyes cold and calculating. "I need you to tell them the delay was because of a supply chain error on your end. I need you to say you misjudged the vendor timelines. I need you to break the promise." The walls of the glass office seemed to shrink. The corporate storm had arrived, and it was demanding a sacrifice. Marcus sat in his car in the parking garage beneath the Willis Tower at 11:47 p.m. The concrete pillars cast long, sickly shadows under the halogen lights. His hands were still shaking. He hadn't taken the fall. He had looked Patterson in the eye and said no. The word had come out thin, brittle, but it had come out. Patterson had stared at him with a mixture of fury and disbelief, then dismissively waved him out of the office with a terse, "We'll discuss this Monday." Now, sitting in the dark, Marcus felt no triumph. He felt terror. The old familiar cortisol loop was roaring, but this time it was different. It wasn't the low hum of the gray noise. It was the deafening siren of social rejection. His brain was screaming at him. "You alienated your boss. You're going to get fired. You'll lose the apartment, the 401 Fides, the identity. You should have just lied." It was a small lie. "Everyone does it," he called Evelyn. She answered on the first ring, her voice clear as if she'd been waiting up. "I can't do this," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "I thought the system would make me feel better. I thought keeping my word would give me peace. But I just made an enemy out of my director. I'm drowning. I want to go back. I want to just be the guy who says yes and makes everyone happy. The people pleaser." At least he survived. There was a long silence on the line. Marcus could hear the faint ticking of a clock in her brown stone. "The people pleaser didn't survive, Marcus," Evelyn said, her voice stripped of its usual warmth. It was cold, surgical, precise. The people pleaser was slowly dying in a conference room at 10:30 a.m., invisible to everyone, including himself. You think V-Days is about feeling good? You think the Roman legions felt good standing in the snow at Cannae holding the line against Hannibal? No, they were terrified. They were freezing. They were dying. But they did not move. She paused, letting the weight of the history settle into his bones. The Roman way is not about feeling better, Marcus. It is about being harder to break. You are in the real war now, the war between the comfortable lie and the devastating truth. The lie feels safe because it is familiar. The truth feels like death because it requires you to kill the part of you that was never real to begin with. So I ask you, are you a legionary, or are you a slave to their approval? Marcus stared at the concrete pillar in front of him. He didn't answer, he just breathed. And then he said, I'm a legionary. Then hold the line, she said, and hung up. Monday arrived like a blade. Marcus walked into the office at 8:15 a.m., his badge clicking against the turnstile with that familiar, sterile beep. The lobby smelled of marble polish and the bitter, over-roasted coffee from the kiosk in the corner. People moved in their usual choreography, eyes down, earbuds in, clutching their laptops like shields. Marcus moved against the current toward the elevator, and for the first time, he noticed something. The gray noise wasn't inside him anymore. It was in the building. It was in the frantic shuffle, the hunched shoulders, the forced smiles. The noise was the environment. He was just standing in it. The restructuring meeting was at 9 a.m. The board had sent down a vice president of operations, a woman named Carla Reeves, to assess the logistics division. It was a bloodletting dressed up as a strategy session. The conference room was packed. Patterson was already there, his jaw tight, a thin sheen of sweat on his upper lip despite the aggressive air conditioning. The junior analysts looked like prisoners awaiting sentencing. Marcus took his seat at the far end of the table, his back straight, his hands flat on the polished wood. Carla Reeves walked in at 9:02. She was sharp, clipped, and radiated the particular cold energy of someone who had been sent to find heads for the chopping block. She opened her leather portfolio and began firing questions. Patterson, why did the Midwest expansion timeline slip? Patterson glanced at Marcus. It was a micro-glance, a fraction of a second, but Marcus felt it like a searchlight. Patterson was setting him up. The old script dictated that Marcus would jump in, apologize, take the blame, and absorb the damage like a human shield. That was his role. That was the people-pleaser's purpose, to be the shock absorber for people with more power and less integrity. But Marcus didn't speak. He felt the impulse. It was like a physical itch in his chest, a gravitational pull towards self-sacrifice. The approval-seeking reflex was deep, wired into years of corporate conditioning. Speak first. Apologize faster. Make yourself smaller so the powerful feel bigger. The cortisol surged, hot and sharp in his veins. His prefrontal cortex screamed at him to submit. He didn't. He sat. He breathed. He let the silence stretch. He looked at Carla Reeves with a calm, steady gaze. Not defiant, not aggressive, just present. Constantia. Patterson, unnerved by Marcus's silence, began to stumble through a convoluted explanation about vendor delays and miscommunication. He was lying, and it was obvious. Carla Reeves let him flounder for 30 excruciating seconds before she raised a manicured hand. I didn't ask for a novel, Dave. I asked for a timeline. She turned her gaze to Marcus. Thorne, you're the supply chain manager. What happened? Marcus leaned forward slightly. The Midwest timeline was never feasible. The vendor capacity didn't exist. I communicated that to Dave on Tuesday. I restructured the deliverables to ensure the Eastern Seaboard data was accurate and delivered on time, which it was. The Midwest data is on track for Tuesday, as I committed. 3 sentences. Veritas. No blame, no apology, no self-flagellation. Just the truth, delivered with the weight of a man whose word was his bond. Carla Reeves studied him for a long moment. Then she made a small note in her portfolio and moved on. The meeting continued. But something had shifted in the room. The junior analysts were looking at Marcus differently. Even Patterson, though his ears were red with suppressed rage, seemed to recognize that the old dynamics had been altered. Marcus had not played his assigned role, and the universe hadn't collapsed. Here is the neuropsychological reality of what just happened. Every time you suppress the impulse to people please, every time you withhold the rush to apologize, every time you sit in the fire of corporate pressure and choose the truth over the comfortable lie, you are engaging in what neuroscientists call fear extinction learning. You are not just making a choice, you are physically rewiring your amygdala. The amygdala is the brain's alarm system. It is trained by years of corporate conditioning to fire when you perceive a social threat, a disapproving boss, a tense meeting, or a missed deadline. But when you sit in that threat and nothing catastrophic happens, when you survive the silence, when you hold the line, the amygdala learns. It creates new neural pathways. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of your rational mind, your Fides, literally builds stronger connections to the amygdala, dampening the fear response. This is not a metaphor. This is neuroplasticity. Every time Marcus chose truth over approval, he was casting a vote for his new identity. He was telling his nervous system, "We are not a subject of this empire. We are a citizen of our own." Over the next 6 weeks, Marcus cast that vote daily. He stopped checking emails before his 4 a.m. silence. He stopped saying, "I'll try," when he meant no. He told his team the truth about what the restructuring meant, even when it was uncomfortable. He lost the approval of Patterson, who now treated him with a cold, professional distance. But he gained something he had never had before: the respect of his team, who began to bring him problems instead of hiding them, because they knew his word was solid. And slowly, imperceptibly, the cage began to dissolve. The test didn't come from an enemy. It came from a crown. It was a Thursday afternoon in late November. The sky over Chicago was the color of wet concrete, and the wind off Lake Michigan rattled the windows of the 23rd floor. Marcus was at his desk, reviewing carrier contracts, when his phone rang. It was Carla Reeves. "Thorne, come to my office." When he walked in, she didn't offer him a seat. She just slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside was an offer letter. Director of Logistics, North American Operations, a 22% salary increase, stock options, a company car. The golden handcuffs, polished to a blinding shine. Marcus stared at the numbers. The old script wrote itself in his head. This is it. This is the reward. You suffered, you held the line, and now you've won. Take it. But then he read the fine print. The new role reported directly to Patterson. It required overseeing the implementation of a vendor consolidation strategy that Marcus knew with absolute, Veritas-level certainty, would cripple the Midwest supply chain within 18 months. Carla Reeves had designed it, Patterson had endorsed it, and they needed Marcus to be the face of it. They needed his newly minted credibility, his V-Days, to sell a broken promise to the board. "We need someone the board trusts," Carla said, watching him carefully. "You've built a reputation for straight talk, Thorne. That's valuable. This role puts you in the room where the decisions are made." The temptation was immense. It wasn't just the money, it was the validation. The corporate world was finally seeing him. Marcus Thorne, the invisible supply chain manager, was being offered a seat at the table. All he had to do was compromise, just one more time, just a small bend in the knee, a slight fracture of the Constantia. He could rationalize it. Everyone does. He could tell himself he'd fix it from the inside. He could make himself believe the lie. He closed the folder. The room was silent. The HVAC hummed. The lake wind rattled the glass. Carla Reeves watched him, her expression unreadable. "I can't take this," Marcus said quietly. "The vendor consolidation strategy will fail. It's built on bad data and worse assumptions. If I take this role and sell it to the board, I'm weaponizing my credibility to lie to them. I won't do it." Carla's eyes narrowed. "You're saying no to a directorship?" "I'm saying no to breaking my word," Marcus replied. "My word is the only thing I have that's actually mine. I'm not trading it for a title." He stood up, left the folder on the desk, and walked out. The quiet choice. No dramatic exit, no mic drop, no triumphant music. Just a man in a gray suit walking down a carpeted hallway, choosing the system over the status, choosing V-Days over the golden handcuffs, choosing the empire of his own soul over the empire that wanted to buy it. 6 months later, Marcus Thorne walked into the same conference room at 10:30 a.m. on a Wednesday. The room still smelled of burnt coffee and synthetic carpet cleaner. The fluorescent lights still hummed their low, oppressive frequency. The corporate world hadn't changed. It never does. But Marcus had. He took his seat at the table. His badge still said Supply Chain Manager. He didn't get the directorship. Patterson eventually resigned under pressure when the vendor consolidation strategy implemented by someone else failed exactly as Marcus had predicted. Carla Reeves was reassigned. The restructuring moved on, a mindless corporate organism devouring and regenerating. But Marcus was no longer a ghost in this room. When he spoke, people listened, not because of his title, but because his word had weight. He had become stone and flame, unmoving in his principles, burning with the quiet, relentless purpose of a man who had built his Dignitas from the bedrock up. The static was gone. The gray noise was something that happened around him, not inside him. He had his 4 a.m. silence, his Fides, his Veritas, his Constantia. He had his self-respect, and no corporation, no Patterson, no golden handcuffs could ever take it away because it was not theirs to give. You didn't click this video to watch a story about a supply chain manager in Chicago. You clicked it because you recognize the cage. You clicked it because you're tired of breaking promises to yourself. You clicked it because the gray noise is so loud in your skull that you can't hear your own voice anymore. The Roman system is open. Fides, trust in your own word. Veritas, the truth, spoken without apology. Constantia, the steadfastness to hold the line when the corporate world demands you bend. These are not ancient relics. They are the operating system for a mind that refuses to be colonized by a job title. The first step isn't a new job. It's a new mindset. It's waking up tomorrow and keeping one small promise to yourself. Not to work harder, not to be more productive, but to sit in the silence and remember who you are before the emails start flooding in. It's telling the truth in one meeting where you would normally swallow it. It's refusing to trade your Dignitas for a performance review. This is the recruitment, not to a company, but to yourself, to the empire of your own character. In the comments, tell me what the one corporate rule you're ready to break. The rule that says you must always say yes. The rule that says your worth is your output. The rule that says the lie is just how business gets done. Name it. Write it down. That is your first act of Veritas. That is the first crack in the cage.